A crowded bus in Montgomery, Alabama. The year is 1955. The air is thick, hot, tense. You know this story, or at least you think you do, because we've all been told about Rosa Parks, the quiet seamstress who refused to give up her seat, the spark that ignited the civil rights movement. But what if I told you 9 months earlier it had already happened? Not by an adult, not by someone carefully chosen, but by a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Her name? Claudette Colvin. Imagine her, a teenager in braids, clutching her books, her heart racing as the bus driver calls the police. Dragged off, handcuffed, alone. And yet, you've probably never heard of her. Why? Why does Rosa Parks stand in the pages of history while Claudette Colvin's name was buried in silence? Her mugshot flashes on screen, a young girl's face caught between fear and fire. The truth is darker, more complicated, more human. Because Claudette's defiance could have changed history. It should have changed history. But instead, she was erased from it. This is not the story you were taught. Montgomery, Alabama, mid-1950s. The law is clear. The seats in the front, reserved for white riders. The back of the bus, that's where black riders belong. Signs scream whites only. But the real message is harsher. You are less. Every day, black commuters lived this ritual of humiliation. Maids, nannies, laborers. They cleaned white homes, raised white children, then climbed onto buses where even exhaustion could not buy them dignity. Picture a woman standing in the aisle after a 12-hour shift. Her feet ache, but an empty seat sits just a few rows ahead, forbidden. Every glance reminds her, the system would rather she suffer than sit. Meanwhile, white riders lived untouched by these rules. For them, it was invisible. A bus ride was just a bus ride. Nothing more, nothing less. And then, there was Claudette Colvin. A teenager, shy, bright, restless. At school, she devoured books on black history. She read about Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, women who had fought, who had refused. And she wondered, could I ever be that brave? Her classmates teased her. Her teachers pushed her to dream. But inside Claudette, something was building. Because knowledge can be dangerous. It can plant seeds that refuse to stay buried. One day soon, those lessons she carried in her school books would leap off the page and onto a crowded Montgomery bus. It's March 2, 1955. Montgomery is sweltering under the southern sun. A bus rattles down the street. Inside, it's packed. The smell of sweat, dust, and gasoline hangs in the air. Near the middle sits a 15-year-old girl. Her name, Claudette Colvin. Her school books rest on her lap. She's just left class, her head still filled with lessons about Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. Then it happens. A white woman boards the bus. The driver turns, his voice sharp. You get up. The rules are simple. If a white passenger wants your seat, you move. No questions, no hesitation. But Claudette doesn't move. Her hands tighten around her books. Her voice, almost a whisper, cuts through the silence. It's my constitutional right. Gasps echo. The bus goes still. In that instant, Claudette is no longer a schoolgirl. She is defiance itself. But the price of defiance comes fast. The driver calls the police. 2 officers storm the bus. They grab her arms, wrench her from the seat, drag her down the aisle as passengers stare. She's 15, terrified, yet she doesn't cry. Cold metal clamps around her wrists. Handcuffs. The sound echoes louder than any applause. Imagine it, a child in chains, for daring to sit where she wasn't supposed to. This moment should have been a spark, a rallying cry, a page in every history book. But instead of becoming a hero, Claudette Colvin's story vanished. What happens when the world isn't ready for its hero? Claudette Colvin had stood her ground. She had been arrested, handcuffed, thrown into a cell for refusing to move. But instead of lifting her up, the movement hesitated. Behind closed doors, leaders whispered. Was she the right face of a revolution? She was only 15, a teenager, unpredictable, emotional. Could she carry the weight of a movement that demanded perfection? Then came another judgment: her skin. Claudette was dark-skinned at a time when colorism cut deep within her own community. Some feared the cameras, the newspapers, the white gaze would not rally behind her. That America, even Black America, would turn away. And there was more. Claudette's family was working class. They lived in poverty. Her father a laundry worker, her mother a maid. No wealthy sponsors, no polished image, just survival. To the NAACP leaders, this mattered. They needed a symbol who could not be attacked, a figure the world would see as beyond reproach. And then came the most devastating blow. Months after her arrest, Claudette discovered she was pregnant. The father, an older man. Immediately, the whispers grew louder. Headlines would twist her story into scandal. Enemies of the movement would point fingers: a reckless girl, a troublemaker, an unfit role model. The leaders were terrified. If Claudette became the face of resistance, would her personal life destroy the cause before it began? So they made a choice, a painful, calculated choice. They pushed Claudette aside, and they waited. They waited for someone older, someone steady, someone with a spotless reputation. Her name would be Rosa Parks. But here's what history often forgets. Even as Claudette faded from the spotlight, she didn't give up. Her courage didn't vanish with the headlines. When the Montgomery Bus Boycott finally began, Claudette Colvin would once again step into history. The question was not if her voice would be heard, but how far it would echo. The year is 1956, Montgomery, Alabama. The buses are still segregated. The boycott rages on, and the fight has now moved into the halls of justice. The case is called Browder versus Gayle. The stakes? Nothing less than the future of segregation in America. 4 brave women step forward to testify. Among them, Claudette Colvin. She is just 15, still in school, still carrying the scars of her arrest. Picture the scene. 3 white judges sit high on the bench, their faces stern, their pens ready to record history or erase it. The courtroom is tense. Every word matters. Every pause feels like an eternity. Claudette rises to speak. She is small. Her voice is steady, but her heart pounds in her chest. She tells them what happened that day on the bus, how she clutched her school books, how she refused to move, how she was dragged away in handcuffs like a criminal. The judges stare. The lawyers shuffle their papers. But Claudette does not flinch. She speaks not just for herself. She speaks for every maid, every laborer, every child who had ever been told, "You are less." Her words cut through the silence like a blade. And in that moment, the balance shifts. Because without Claudette, without her courage, her testimony, the boycott may not have triumphed. But with her, the court delivers a landmark decision. Segregation on buses is unconstitutional. The buses of Montgomery would never be the same again. Yet here's the twist. Claudette helped end bus segregation in the courtroom, but her name was lost outside of it. The victory belonged to Rosa Parks in the headlines. The glory belonged to the movement's chosen symbol. So the question remains, why did Rosa Parks become a global icon, while Claudette Colvin disappeared into history's shadows? By 1955, the civil rights struggle in Montgomery had reached a breaking point. Black citizens were tired, angry, ready to fight. The boycott was building. The buses were half empty. The city was losing money. Change was coming, but the movement needed a symbol. And here was the choice. Claudette Colvin, 15 years old, already arrested, already defiant, the first to sit, the first to refuse, the first to be dragged away. Or Rosa Parks, 42, mature, calm, respected in the community, secretary of the NAACP, a woman whose life was spotless, her reputation untouchable. Behind closed doors, leaders debated. Every detail was weighed. Claudette's age, her working-class family, her dark skin, and, above all, her pregnancy. Could America embrace a teenage girl with scandal attached to her name? Or would the headlines twist her story, mocking the cause before it had a chance to rise? The stakes were too high. The leaders knew one wrong move and the movement could collapse. So the decision was made. Rosa Parks would be the face, the icon, the story that history would tell. And Claudette, she faded into the shadows, not because she lacked courage, not because she lacked fire, but because strategy demanded sacrifice. Imagine being 15. You risk everything. You stand up when no one else will. And then you are told, not you, not now, not enough. It feels like betrayal, yet it was also survival. Because Rosa Parks was exactly what the movement needed to capture the nation's conscience. Her quiet defiance was impossible to dismiss. Her reputation was impossible to attack. Her arrest became the spark that set Montgomery ablaze. And so history turned, not on the shoulders of the first who resisted, but on the one who was chosen to be remembered. It leaves us with a haunting question. Did history sacrifice a child for the sake of victory? What happens to a pioneer when history forgets her name? After the boycott, after the court case, after Rosa Parks became the immortal face of resistance, Claudette Colvin slipped quietly into the background. She was just a teenager still, but her community had moved on. The movement had chosen its symbol, and Claudette, the girl who first refused, was left standing in the shadows. She left Montgomery. She left Alabama. She left behind the buses that had broken her heart. Her new home?
New York City. Not as an activist, not as a leader, but as a nurse's aide. For decades, she worked in hospitals, caring for the sick, the forgotten, the weak. Day after day, year after year, she changed sheets, held hands, watched lives slip away. Her courage had once shaken the walls of segregation, but now her hands simply comforted the dying. And all the while, she carried the weight, the knowledge, the truth, that before Rosa Parks, before the boycott, before the victory, she had struck the first blow. But history didn't call her name. Imagine the loneliness of that burden, to know you changed the world and the world chose not to see you.
To open a history book and find your place missing. To hear others hailed as heroes, while your moment of defiance was buried in silence. For Claudette, that silence was her companion, her invisible shadow, her lifelong ache. And yet, she never stopped believing, never stopped knowing what she had done. Because truth doesn't vanish. It lingers. It waits. And sometimes, history has a way of resurfacing buried truths. What if the voices we ignore today are the ones who change tomorrow? Look around. In every corner of the world, it is the young who rise first. They march in the streets for racial justice. They walk out of classrooms demanding climate action. They kneel, they chant, they raise their fists, not because they are powerful, but because they are told they are powerless. And yet, they move the world. Just like Claudette Colvin. She was 15, overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. But history shows us revolutions don't always begin with the chosen. They begin with the brave, the underestimated, the ones willing to risk everything, even when no one is watching. Claudette Colvin reminds us change begins not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. Not with the perfect, but with the defiant. So ask yourself, how many Claudettes are out there today? How many voices are being ignored? How many young people are planting seeds of history right now that the world won't recognize until it's too late? Her story forces us to face an uncomfortable truth, that sometimes those who strike the first blow never get the glory. But without them, the victories we celebrate would never exist. If Claudette's story moved you, don't let it vanish again. Share it, tell it, keep her name alive. Because history should remember her not as the girl who was forgotten, but as the girl who sat down so that generations could stand tall.